a lot of things I want to talk about with you. And as I said earlier, when we first got on, I'm kind of got an identity crisis because the Everyday Millionaire is really about seemingly ordinary individuals like yourself who have really accomplished some extraordinary things. But I think this is really a topical, like we're looking at what's going on in Canada in the housing market. Both you and I have that background and that passion to understand where housing is going, why it is where it is today, and where the hell is it going from here? And it's just the weirdest thing that's unfolding that we're living through. And I think there's a part of me that goes, having been in business as long as I have, and you as long as you have, having been a part of this industry, I don't know, I feel like we should be able to crack the code, but I'm just not optimistic given what's happening. So when you look at the housing market today, it's off the charts, not enough listings, prices continue to go. Bank of Canada, we can get into a whole conversation of my belief about TIF should have been fired a long time ago. But that aside, give me your kind of oversight of what you're seeing in the market, and I guess maybe even what you see as some possible fixes. Do you have that view? That's a big topic, I know.
It's a big topic. We start at the beginning. That we have to accept that it's not just Canada. And for some reason, some of the big English-speaking countries, particularly Canada and Australia, look very, very similar in terms of extremely high housing prices. My catchphrase is batshit crazy house prices is what we have in these countries, because they're very, very hard to justify. People say that Toronto's a world-class city. God knows it's the biggest city in Canada. It's the sort of the heart of this country. It's got more head offices here than any place else, times 10. But here's the crazy part. We see exceptionally high prices in places that they shouldn't be high. If you're in the Vancouver area, why is a house in Agassiz, which is so far from the beauty of downtown Vancouver, so far, Agassiz is so far, it's $1.1 million to buy a detached house in Agassiz. It doesn't make any sense. That's an hour and 10-minute drive. We've got places out in the outskirts of the 905 and past the 905, Milton, Guelph, Cambridge, wild house prices. I mean, people like to talk about Toronto like it's New York. Well, I don't know about you. I've been to Manhattan, and Toronto is not Manhattan. Like, I don't care what anybody says. Like, Manhattan's the capital of the world. I mean, Toronto's a big, great big city. I love it, but it's not Manhattan. And the question becomes, if you drive an hour and a quarter away from Manhattan going to upstate New York, you'll find lots of towns, little towns, small cities, with homes, the starting price is $444,000. I mean, you drive an hour and 10 minutes away from the center of Toronto, and the house prices are still $1.2 million. I mean, there's things about this that don't make sense. There's been a number of influencing factors over the years. Maybe the key thing in the United States is they went through a housing meltdown in 2008, 2009. It reversed trends. It changed their mortgage landscape. Quite frankly, millions of people lost their homes, and prices fell in some regions dramatically, like 40, 50% in some regions. And that was a big reset in that country. We never had it in 2008, 2009, neither did Australia, neither did New Zealand. And we had maybe a little 15% reversal for a year, and bingo, we were back at it again in 2010, stronger than ever. So we never had that reversal. We never had that big come to Jesus moment. So we've been cruising along from about 2009, 2010, right through to COVID, on what you could call the zero interest rate program, the ZIRP. Okay, it was very, very low interest rates, far below traditional interest rates that you and I are familiar with. You and I have seen very high interest rates in our day. You and I have seen lots of 5s, 7s, 9s, 8s, 11s mortgage rates. We've seen a lot of them. We did not see any of that for nearly 12 years, culminating in COVID, where we saw fixed mortgage rates for 5 years go down to 1.49 and variable rates down as low as less than 1%, which in a climate of 2% inflation is a negative rate in reality. So interest rates like we never saw or never imagined could happen. And again, the market reacted accordingly and the market soared. So there's a lot of reasons behind these incredibly high house prices, but we thought that when interest rates went to 4.5 from 0.25, like 0.25 to 4.5 in less than a year, that's the steepest, most aggressive rise in interest rates in the history of Canada, like, period. We all thought, well, and we watched it, like prices started to come off in March of 2022. Prices fell. We all tried to surmise how much they might fall. And it looked pretty grim for a few months there. And yet here we are in 2023, in May of 2023, and prices indeed started rebounding. Only 1 year later, in March of 2023, we saw prices in the Greater Vancouver area, Calgary, and Toronto, Metro Toronto, Southwest Ontario. We saw them all start to rise again. So it's almost just a blink, and we've seen aggressive price increases in some of these marketplaces. Now,
well, that does seem pretty consistent right across the country, because we are in fact seeing price increases throughout BC, and again back into Alberta, we're looking at prices in Calgary. Not so much Edmonton. Edmonton would be the exception to really almost the whole province of Alberta, by the way, and who knows why that is. But Edmonton generally lags Calgary. But when I look at Lethbridge, when we look at what's happening in Medicine Hat, Grand Prairie, prices continue to actually have pressure upwards right across. So it seems to be right across the country. I know that some parts of Southern Ontario have softened a bit, have not come back to their pre-COVID lows, if you want to use that term. But they backed off. Let's put it this way: they backed off the 2022 highs. And so when you look at it, when you assess it, we look at increasing interest rates. We see that really slowed down things for a bit of kind of like a heartbeat, and then we're back again. We're seeing ultra low listings, record low listings right across the country again. We're seeing ridiculous record breaking immigration into the country, and nobody seems to know the right hand of any given government, provincial, federal, municipal. The right hand doesn't seem to know what the left hand is doing. Everything is tied up in bureaucracy. I don't know. It's hard to look into the future and be optimistic for prices coming off or slowing down. What's your thoughts?
It's a good synopsis. By the way, I might be the only person living in Toronto who's been to every single one of those towns you listed in Alberta.
That's awesome.
Lived in two of them. I lived in Alberta for almost 8 years. My wife's an Albertan. My eldest son was born in Calgary. I'm originally from Vancouver, so I know this.
You know it.
I know this country. I know this country. Spent a year and a half in Montreal. Enjoyed every minute of it. My French is nowhere near good enough to stay, but I've seen a lot of Canada, and I'll make this little aside. We live in a great country. It's a really great country, so everybody should make the effort to see more of Canada, because it's a terrific place. It's a great bunch of people. And apart from some of the real failings that we're experiencing in the last couple of years, it's been a great country to live in. It's been great to meet your family.
I concur totally.
This thing we're observing right now really should not be unexpected, even though I did not expect it. But when we start to examine the key factors in play, there's a reason behind this sudden leap in house prices. You and I know enough about real estate to know that there is just an impulse to buy. Things happen in people's lives. People get divorced. People have twins. People get job transfers. There's consistently something happening that prompts people to want to make a house purchase or buy a bigger home. Or there's all these factors are always there. They're innate to our culture. So you can suppress it for a while, and obviously we suppressed it from March of 22. So ultra low sales numbers throughout Canada, all through the summer of 2022, horrifically low volume numbers, individual unit numbers of housing sales in the fall of 22. But you can only suppress it so long. And here's what happened. We thought, you and I have been through a few of these housing cycles, right? So what normally happens in a housing cycle like this when interest rates spike enormously, some people just, particularly when we had a variable was the most popular mortgage by all means in 2021 and part of 2022. So we had this enormous spike in variable, enormous spike in HELOC cost. We saw all this happening and thought to ourselves, well, if this is anything like past cycles, some people are going to be forced to sell. I mean, there's definitely going to be some people forced to sell. But what we didn't know is that 80% of the variable mortgages in Canada, the payment doesn't change. Like we sort of knew it, like I sort of had it in the back of my mind as a mortgage broker, but it was never a meaningful thing. But when the mortgage rate that the client had went from 1.45 to 5.7, and their payment didn't change, I didn't really know that that was what was going to happen, that kind of a thing could occur. So we had 80% of the variable rate mortgages in Canada, the payments barely changed. For the people who it was changing, some of them locked in, some of them found ways to manage it. And then for the HELOC people, some of those people just disposed of some of the HELOC debt they had. Some people, they might have sold the rental property, but it was all made manageable by the fact that so many of the mortgages were very low rates. I mean,
so Ron, sorry to interrupt. Can we unpack that a little bit so listeners understand what went on in the background? Ultimately, to your point, you go from 1.5 to 5.7 and the payment didn't change. Let's kind of describe why that happened and why you, especially somebody like yourself in the mortgage industry, how the heck did we miss it?
Well, we just never, in the last 20 years, we've never had the experience. It never happened before. Sure, there's been gradual movement in prime rate, and but we've never had 0.25% go to 4.5 at the Bank of Canada. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened in my life. Okay, so we were all waiting for something to happen, and suddenly we realized these mortgages, the way they're built is they have a trigger point. So in theory, they shouldn't go into negative amortization. So I'm using some jargon. Sorry for that. Negative amortization is when your payment is not enough to cover your interest, and your mortgage actually starts to grow. The principal is not being paid down. It's actually starting to grow. So we assumed that this would be a severe trigger point and it would reset a whole bunch of mortgages. But guess what? No, we never even bothered. I'm just being truthful here, honest to God truthful. We've never even studied these contracts enough to realize not so. Some of these, in many cases, these mortgages could grow, and there'd be a final point where they actually exceeded a certain preset amount that's in the contract. But there was an allowance for the mortgage to payment not to change and for the principal to actually increase with many lenders. And for the lenders where it was not true, there is a couple of lenders where every time the rate went up, the payment went up, and we heard from those people, they were not happy. But for 80% of the bank people in Canada, bank mortgages in Canada, sometimes the bank asks for small increases, just to make sure that you are paying $2 down on your principal every month. Now, we just didn't really understand it. I mean, I'm here to be honest. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of mortgage brokers jump out of the woodwork and say, "Oh, you're crazy. I knew all that precisely, and I could tell you that. No problem. I knew that."
Yeah.
I'm going to call people on that. Because I read like 1,000 tweets in the spring of 2022 that said we're going to be in big trouble when these trigger rates hit. And guess what? No big trouble. So that's the answer. The answer is variable rate contracts in Canada, which allowed principal to grow in many cases. And This is actually something that's against the law in the United States. So
So interesting, isn't it?